Hey guys, welcome back to Tales at the Trailhead, or if it's your first time, welcome to Tales at the Trailhead, where we sit around and tell some of the scariest stories, usually focus on outdoors that we can find. Getting right into it, this first story I had submitted by one of our viewers named Jay. So shout out to you, Jay. Thank you so much for sending in your story. Jay is from California. Well, at least he was originally. He was up north, kind of by the area where Bigfoot sightings started to become very prevalent back in the 90s. And he really wasn't a believer back then. He was, in his late or early 20s, I should say. And he heard all the stories. He had cousins who claimed they've had Bigfoot encounters or, at least seen things, heard things out in the woods, because their entire family was all extremely avid outdoorsmen. They loved camping, they loved hiking, fishing, everything in between. So Jay was kind of the odd one out, because he was the only one who didn't, it wasn't so much as he didn't believe in Bigfoot, he just didn't really care. He didn't really care. He didn't find it fascinating. He didn't find the stories like, that his brothers or cousins or whoever told him, very intriguing. He's like, oh, okay, sure. Because he's one of those guys, I was going to say was, but still is one of those guys who is very grounded, needs the proof right in front of his face. So this whole event occurred around the late 2010s. Now, Jay was out of college. He had moved out over to Idaho, pursuing a career shortly after. And he came home to California to visit some family. His brothers were still there, his cousins, his parents, pretty much everybody, except for him and a stepbrother that was on the East Coast. And he came home, and they all decided they were going to go for a hike and camp out a night. Now, where they lived was just on the edge of one of the bigger forests in Northern California. Their property almost backed up to it. About, just within a few miles, but they were very close. So, with them being avid outdoors people, it was very convenient, extremely convenient. So Jay was home. They decided they were going to go camp and hike for a bit, and they didn't have a huge hike planned or anything like that. The camping was kind of the star of the show this day, and the hiking was kind of, an afterthought. So they go out and they park at this forest. It's Jay, his dad Matt, and his brother Dylan. So those three out there tonight. So they get out, they saddle up, they all have their hiking bags, which are absolutely overkill for this trip. They got the whole, like 80-liter hiking bag, each one of them. And one of them has a tent. They all have a sleeping bag and a mat and some freeze-dried food, water, the normal camping stuff. So they all go out and they start hiking. They start hiking into this forest. And it's a very nice forest. Lots of tall evergreen type trees. Very old. These trees are huge. You can tell like this forest is very, very old. And they go hiking, beautiful day out, perfect weather. No rain, almost no clouds in the sky, just beautiful California day. And they hike through streams, through some shallow streams, through the dense trees. And it's a wonderful time. Now, this forest is known for having some dispersed camping, which is camping that it's not enough. There's no official site. You can kind of, if you find a good place to camp, you can stay there. It's no problem. So after a little while hiking, only about, hour and a half, 2 hours or so, they're like, you know what, let's set up camp. Because they had already gotten a later start in the day. They just want to enjoy each other's company. Jay wasn't going to be home for too long. So, his dad and his brother really wanted to they all wanted to spend some time together. And sometimes it's, hard to carry on a good conversation while hiking, So they go, they find a nice spot, nice flat spot, very cleared out spot. It definitely had been used by campers before, for dispersed camping, the ones that, it had been set up in plenty of times. So they get out there, they have 2 tents. Jay has his own tent. Then his dad and his brother, they're sharing a bigger tent. It's a 4-person tent. So they all get out. They start setting up their tents. It's nothing. They don't have any of their hardcore camping equipment with them. This is more like kind of like relaxed stuff. So they get it set up pretty quick, and it's nice, And by this point, it's starting to get a little bit not late in the evening, but later in the evening, and they get it all set up. And that's when they hear something. Way in the distance, they hear somebody. It sounds like somebody is taking like 2 large, like dead, hollow branches and like slapping them together like this, like knock, knock. Like it sounds like a knock, almost like if somebody was knocking on a gigantic hollow door, like one of those doors from a castle that you see. And they all kind of look in the distance at the source of this sound. And Jay doesn't know what this is, but he catches out of the corner of his eye his dad and brother kind of exchange glances, with each other, kind of give each other the side eye. So it's like, what do you guys know that I don't? And they say, or Dylan begins to explain, like, this is where our dad said that, he encountered a Sasquatch out here. And he heard the exact same thing. And I've heard it before too, in a different forest. But that's what they do. They knock things together to communicate. They make a lot of noise to communicate like that. And Jay just brushes it off. He's like, okay, sure. Yeah, we're in the Bigfoot forest. Right. So this is not quickly forgotten by Matt or Dylan, but quickly forgotten by Jay as they continue to settle in, gather some sticks. And this is one of the rare times where they can actually have a campfire with no worries of, having the risk of wildfire. So they set up a small campfire and they make sure it's contained, They put the rocks around the area where they have the bonfire, and they're responsible about it, but thankfully they're, in no danger for wildfires at this current time. So, they're able to sit there and enjoy the fire, and they get out their freeze-dried food and their water, and they start making dinner and everything. And just sitting around, catching up, having a good time, even though they're, family, it's still nice to catch up with each other in person. Even though they're on the phone with each other multiple times a week, it's still nice to be in person, talking face to face. Sometimes it feels like, even if you keep up with somebody, that you're really seeing them again for the first time after a while, by talking face to face. And, that's how they felt. So the night goes on, and brought a couple beers with, sitting there having a couple drinks, enjoying the fire, throwing a couple logs on the fire every now and then, toasting some marshmallows because they forgot the supplies for s'mores. And it's a great night. Beautiful weather, just chilly enough to be comfortable, but not uncomfortable. And they're cracking jokes. They're having a good time. That's when they hear it again. The same knocking. Come from the same direction, but much, much closer. And this time, Jay kind of pauses. Takes him a second to really take this in. Because he knows now it's late enough that any type of large enough mammal would be sleeping. What would make that noise? He's racking his head like, okay, what could make that? What's large enough to be making that noise? Or he thought maybe it's just trees hitting each other, like a branch broke off a tree. It's dangling and the wind is pushing it in the trunk and it's making that noise. But he can't convince himself fully of that because he knows that the first time he heard it was quite a bit further, and the second time they've heard it now is substantially closer. Also, there's no wind. So how would that be possible? And again, his dad and brother exchange looks at each other and kind of crack a smile. And Jay, for the first time, asks his father with an open mind, well, a little bit more open than usual, like, all right, what did you experience out here? Just asks his dad that directly, and his dad kind of, moves in his seat a little bit and gets comfortable as he's about to tell a story, just like I'm telling you guys now. And he explains to Jay that about 10 years ago, he was out here hiking by himself, walking through the forest, when he heard the same exact noise. And he already knew. His dad knew stuff about Bigfoot. He knew the vocalizations. He knew their habits. He knew what we know about their patterns. And so immediately he identified that. He's like, that's what it is. That's a Sasquatch. That's a Bigfoot in the distance. And as he hiked, he kept hearing these knocks. But they would come from both sides of him. They would come from the west, and then they would be returned in the east. It wasn't echoes. Two distinct knocks with different cadences. One from the east, one from the west, as if something was communicating. And their intervals were staggered as well. So it's not like one was just making a noise and echoing. So he continues to hike, and that's when he sees something. Now, this is late at night. This is, in the late 2000s. So it's not like he had a great video camera on his phone. It's not like, he had any great LED flashlights. Like, all that stuff was very minimal then. But he's hiking. Shortly after he hears these knocks, he's got his flashlight out. He's scanning the trail with his flashlight. His flashlight lands on something. And from what he remembers, it is a very tall, very dark colored being. He said it couldn't have been any less than 7.5 feet, because Matt was a little over 6 foot, and this creature definitely had another foot or two on him, easily. So it was standing about 20 to 30 feet in front of him, and his flashlight lands on it. And what he says he remembers is the flashlight didn't illuminate this creature. It's like the creature just took all of the light and absorbed it into its coat. He said it was like a black hole almost. But he saw the outline of this very, very tall, very dense creature. It was bipedal. It had longer black fur. He thinks the fur that came off of it was probably about, the strands were 6 to 7 inches in length. And it had the face of what looked like to be a gorilla, but more human, he said. Well, he didn't know. He paused. He said this encounter felt like it lasted 10 minutes, but it was probably less than 10 seconds. So his flashlight lands on this. He gets enough time to kind of, take it in briefly. And then he said this creature just disappears without a sound. Almost like it vanishes into thin air right in front of him. It was gone in the blink of an eye. So he sits back and leans back after explaining that to Jay, his encounter. And Jay tries his best just to chalk it up. Like, okay, maybe he saw a bear. Maybe he saw a gigantic black bear or something that was standing on its legs. But he knows his father. He knows his father isn't going to make this up. He knows his father isn't going to exaggerate this. And he knows his father knows what a bear looks like, having encountered many upon his, tenure as a outdoorsman. So in his head, he's trying to debunk the story as his father tells it, but he can't. It's one of those things he can't do. He can't debunk it. Well, they don't hear any more knocks for the rest of the night. The encounter has been forgotten about for the most part, and they all decide to go to bed. They all go to their respective tents. They throw a few pieces of wood on the fire, not hoping to keep it burning all night, but just enough so hopefully there's some hot coals in the morning to get it going easier for breakfast, because they can just throw some dry tinder on there, kindling, and get it going pretty quickly again. So they throw some wood on the fire. They all climb into their tents, get in their sleeping bags. So now it's getting a little bit brisk out, and go to sleep. Most of the night passes by. Jay has decided to leave the rain flap off of his tent because it's absolutely gorgeous night. And what's better than, sleeping under the stars, being able to lay down your sleeping bag, look up and see the stars right above you. Absolutely cloudless night. So he's dozed off, or at the point of dozing off, when something wakes him up. He hears something coming into his camp, into their camp. First, he brushes it off because he's half asleep at this point, maybe even more than half asleep. He brushes this off like, okay, you know what? Maybe it's a raccoon or a squirrel or something weird, possibly a coyote or whatever. But then he notices something that alerts him a little bit more. He knows it. He notices its walk. He hears like 1 foot, and he hears another foot, then 1 foot, then another foot. So he starts to perk up a little bit more, thinking that doesn't sound like a four-legged animal. It sounds like something with some weight to it. And yeah, he just, it's like that. It doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound like something normal. And at first he thinks, okay, maybe it's a person. Maybe somebody else stumbled into our camp. Maybe somebody's lost out here that needs help. Who knows? You never know. You never know what you're going to encounter. But then, putting this together, that stride is definitely longer than a normal person's stride. Like from the time of one step to another, it's a good bit of time. So this person, or whatever it is, must be taking some long steps. So he's starting to wake up a little bit more now upon this realization. And that's when he hears something in his camp. He hears the metal pot that they boiled water in for their dinners. He hears that being moved, like kind of shaken a little bit, very quietly. If you were asleep, it wouldn't be have been shaken loud enough to wake you up. That's how quietly, it was moved. But since he was awake, now fully waking up at this point, it's something he noticed. So he hears this, and he kind of perks up, and he sits there. But the sounds stop. The movement stops, He's just laying there. Now eyes open, just kind of staring up at the sky, trying to strain his ears to hear anything else that's kind of going on. And then he hears something else. He hears another step. This time, it sounds like it's coming closer to him. So he's starting to feel the hair, the back of his neck stand up. Because he knows something is getting closer to where he is. And there's another step, even closer. Then as he's laying there, looking up through the tent at the sky, he sees something lean over the tent. Lean over and look in. It looks like just a black silhouette. There's no defining features on it. It's just this black, shaggy silhouette. Said it looked like a hairy shadow. But it's looking over his tent. His tent is about 3.5, 4 feet high. And he said this thing easily had another 5 feet over the tent. So he's laying down while this hairy shadow is looking straight down at him. And he couldn't see any facial features of this thing, nothing. But he said he could tell that he was looking into its eyes and it was looking back into his eyes. And he said they were sitting there for at least 20 to 30 seconds, staring at each other, just kind of observing each other. And that's when he heard the knock again. The knock on the trees from the distance. And he said as soon as he heard that, the thing was gone. Again, in a blink of an eye. It's like it was there, and then he realized that he was just staring up at the sky again. 1 second it was there, and the next second it was gone. And he didn't even hear it move away from the camp. Well, he sat there, too afraid to leave his tent, and too afraid to go back to sleep. So he sat there until sunlight came, because he didn't want to be the one that went back to sleep either, with his dad and brother next to him. He didn't want everybody to be asleep in case this thing came back. He also didn't want to be the person that screams, "Oh, I just saw a monster coming to the camp, guys, wake up." That wasn't him. He didn't want to be like that, so he was too terrified to go back to sleep, but at the same time, wanted to stand guard. So he was like, all right, I'm just going to stay up all night. I think I slept for 15 minutes. It's good enough. Well, morning comes, and pretty much as soon as dawn cracks, his brother and dad get up. He hears them moving around. They're very early morning people, the absolute opposite of Jay. But that morning, they're all morning people. So they get up. He gets up, he gets out of the tent, and he sees his brother and his dad. They're not saying anything. They're not saying anything at all. They're just standing there. Just standing there, staring at the ground. And Jay is ready to tell him about this. Now that everybody's up, he's ready to tell him what he experienced. But he looks at the ground too. And he sees by the fire where the metal utensils were, like the cups and stuff that they were using for their dinner that he heard being moved. He saw one of them tipped over on the side of the fire, just like he'd heard. But he sees what they're staring at. And what they are staring at are gigantic footprints that lead from in the woods to the fire pit, over to his tent, where he sees 2 footprints right by his tent, side by side, where this creature was staring at him. And then from there, back into the forest. So he sees all of this. His brother and his dad see all of this. And he, at that exact point, he becomes a believer. And his dad and brother are just, they look at each other and they just become all smiles. Because once again, everything they know, everything they've experienced, there is further proof to confirm it for them. And they look over at Jay. They kind of give him that look like, you believe us now? And Jay is like, I have something to tell you guys. He explains the entire night. So the plan was they were going to go back as quickly as they could to their vehicle, go out, get some plaster, come back, and make some casts of these footprints, because they were fresh, they were very defined, and they go to do that. Starts raining. Rain eats up all those footprints. They came back and it was just a muddy mess. So unfortunately, all they had to tell was a story about it. Let me know what you guys think. Do you believe Jay's story? Do you think he could be credible? I'm not sure. Either way, I found it very fascinating and very entertaining, and I love hearing about these experiences. That's all we have for you guys today. Thank you for tuning in. I will be uploading on this channel a few times a week, and just telling stories that I've heard. So I hope that you guys will join me on this adventure. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Check out the social media links. They'll be in the description. Thanks for tuning in, spending your time with me. And I look forward to seeing you again at Tales at the Trailhead.